What is going on, everybody? It is Sunday afternoon, March 27th, and the news today surrounding the 49ers is this report about the New York Jets having an eye on Deebo Samuel as a potential trade target. The report also mentioned that the Jets are monitoring the situation surrounding DK Metcalf in Seattle, as well as A.J. Brown. And the thing that Samuel, Metcalf, and Brown all have in common is that they were all drafted in the 2019 draft. None of them were first-round picks, which means that none of them have a fifth-year option, and that the 2022 season is the last year they are on their rookie deals under contract with their current teams. So I think it just basically means the Jets are monitoring to see if there's any potential movement. And given the fact that we've seen some pretty big names moved in recent weeks during this very peculiar NFL offseason, I think that it's more so the Jets just doing their due diligence and checking to see if maybe there is an impasse with contract negotiations and if one of these teams are willing to move one of those players. It makes sense when you think about the fact that they have a pretty young roster. They have a quarterback going into year two. Adding any of those three names is going to not only make your football team better, but also make life easier on the young quarterback that you invested heavily in taking second overall in last year's draft. So with Samuel specifically, this is pertaining to the 49ers, so I'm going to focus on him. The quote that Rich Cimini of ESPN included in his article said, to say that the coaches have an affinity for Samuel would be an understatement. At this point, there's no indication that any of them are available, meaning Brown and Metcalf as well. But the Jets are keeping a close eye on situations just in case. So again, it makes sense. You have Mike LaFleur, the offensive coordinator in New York, worked closely with Samuel in San Francisco. Robert Saleh was spending a lot of time with Samuel in San Francisco, got to see firsthand what he would do to his defense during practices, saw him up close on the sidelines every game while they were together in San Francisco. So it makes sense there's a lot of affinity for Deebo Samuel. He's a very good player, and I want to touch on why there would be such an affinity for him. Samuel is coming off of a season that is unprecedented for NFL wide receivers. It had never happened before. He is the first receiver in NFL history to record over 1,300 receiving yards as well as 300-plus rushing yards. And what we saw him do, basically being the engine of what started out as a pretty stagnant offense for the 49ers and propelling them to this deep playoff run, literally feeling like single-handedly keeping them in games at times based on what he was able to do with the football in his hands and the various ways they could get him the ball behind the line of scrimmage, over the middle, as a running back, having him carry on these toss sweeps to the outside. He just had such a dynamic presence for this offense. And it's something that I don't think is replaceable. And I think that it's a situation where you have to understand that the reason why teams would be willing to give up so many picks for a guy like Samuel and move the amount of capital that gets thrown around in these potential trades is because he is such a transcendent player. And those players are so hard to find. And in my opinion, when you find them, you keep them on the roster as long as possible. And I understand that's probably, most people are like, yeah, that makes sense. That's common sense, right? Well, unfortunately, that's not the discussion I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of advocacy for moving Samuel for draft picks, getting something back in return, and the freeing up cap space and, maximizing on a player's value, all those discussions. This is why I don't think it's a great idea. When we look back in recent history and we talk about players getting moved for draft picks, when we're talking about superstar players getting moved for draft capital, very rarely does it work out for the team that is giving up the superstar player. And the definition of superstar can vary. Some players I may not think are a superstar that got moved, and some people might cite examples like that. But if we're talking about true blue chip talent that's objectively a superstar level player, there's two trades in recent memory that come to mind for me that have been completed. The draft picks have been made for those players, and we've gotten to see at least a glimpse of what those draft picks might turn into at the NFL level, or at least can project to a degree. And that is Jalen Ramsey going from the Jaguars to the Rams in exchange for 2 first-round picks and a 4th-round pick. And then Khalil Mack going from the Bears to the Raiders in exchange for 2 first-round picks, a 3rd, and a 6th. So I'd like to mention that the return for the Rams trade was, so For the Jaguars, the return they got back 2 firsts and a fourth, remember. So the first round pick that they used was on K'Lavon Chaisson, an edge player out of LSU. They took it 20th overall in the 2020 draft. Chaisson has 44 pressures in 2 seasons. He's recorded 2 sacks in his first 2 seasons total, and he was slowly phased out of the defense in that pass rushing role as his pass rushing snaps dwindled as the season wore down. And this is only in year 2 after being a top 20 pick the year before. Travis Etienne, we unfortunately haven't gotten to see really what he's going to be at the NFL level yet. He suffered a foot injury during the preseason last year, and he missed his entire rookie season as a result. So the jury is still out. The reason why I'm a little bit more confident, not necessarily finalizing the results of this trade, but discussing it, is because I think taking a running back that early is kind of a mismanagement of assets. And to me, you're not going to get the same, even if Etienne's 1,000-yard back and dynamic for the offense, you're not getting the same return that you're getting from an all-pro corner. So to me, I don't like it, even though we haven't gotten to see what Etienne is yet. And then Jordan Smith, who has appeared in 2 games, has 0 pressures, 0 sacks, and is yet to make an impact. So when you weigh this, the Rams got an all-pro corner who's made an all-pro team since he's gone to Los Angeles as well, was a pivotal part in them winning a Super Bowl. And then the Jaguars, they get the 3 draft picks, they get the 2 first-round picks, but they not only didn't find an impact player, they couldn't find a guy that can be a consistent starter yet. And again, Etienne, maybe that changes things when he comes in, but to this point, we haven't really seen that. And Urban Meyer, it was a messy situation when he was there. But his role, when he mentioned his role that he envisioned for Etienne when drafting him, it didn't sound like he was going to be an every down bell cow back. And they invested a top 30 pick into that. So for me, I don't really like that return on investment. I think it's a clear-cut win for the Rams getting that superstar player. And yes, the Rams had to pay Ramsey. He got $20 million a year from them. But again, it's a blue chip talent at a pivotal position. Then we look at the Raiders, right? The Raiders took Josh Jacobs and Damon Arnett with their 2 first-round picks. Arnett's no longer with the team. And Josh Jacobs, while I think he's a good running back, I'm a fan of his game. Again, I don't like the value of running backs that early, and I think that you could have gotten a much more impactful player at a much more important position than what you got with Jacobs. I like Bryan Edwards as well. That's who they took with their 3rd-round pick. But with Edwards, again, it's a situation where, I've been a big believer in his, but we haven't really seen the full potential get there yet. And then the 6th-round pick they had went back to New York when they sent Kalichi Osemele back to the Jets in exchange for a 5th-round pick. So realistically, they came away with Arnett, Jacobs, and Bryan Edwards as of now as players that have had a decent amount of time in the league that we can kind of really place an evaluation on in exchange for Khalil Mack. And while Mack has been injured in recent seasons and hasn't really been able to string together a full 17 games, he also went to Chicago immediately and led them to a playoff berth by being the best player on a top defense in the entire league. And the Raiders spent years trying to replicate the lack of pass rush that they got from a player like Khalil Mack. So there may be differing opinions on those, but to me, it was pretty clear cut that the teams getting the superstar player got that immediate impact, and it proves how hard it is to hit on these guys that you're basically trading a known commodity for a player that could end up being good or they could end up fizzling out. And as we've seen with these examples with Jacksonville and the Raiders, your hit rate's not going to be great. And even with teams that are really good at drafting and are very successful navigating the draft, scouting, developing, all that stuff, like 50% is a pretty solid hit rate for most teams. Like that's a successful draft in my eyes. If you have 8 draft picks and you hit on 4 players that are, starters, depth guys that are going to get on the football field and give you a semi, productive output and some decent impact, that's a good return on investment to me. So that's kind of where I get to this hypothetical with Samuel, right? Let's circle back to the 49ers here. If a team were to offer 2 seconds and maybe a mid-day 2 pick or something like that for Samuel, your odds of finding somebody that's even half as talented as Samuel and is able to have half of the impact Samuel is, 50% of the player Samuel is with one of those picks is slim to none. that is a very optimistic outlook. Like maybe you get a guy that can do half of what Samuel's been able to do for you and start and be a decent receiver, or be a decent, starter at another position, while you also have to replace the massive hole that gets left from what we saw from Deebo Samuel and all the production that he's been able to manifest. And again, this comes back to, I still think we haven't even seen the best from Deebo Samuel yet. And the argument gets thrown around, well, if they trade him, they get all this cap space, they can, sign players and do this and that. So the Raiders, let's circle back to that. When they didn't pay Khalil Mack and they traded him before he got his big extension from Chicago, the big players that they brought in were Tyrell Williams and Antonio Brown, both of which did not work out well for the team. And they were signings that you can't sit there and chalk up as a win, remotely close to a win for the team. So again, it comes back to, as much as I think the 49ers have a strong track record and they have a good amount of equity when it comes to having belief in their process and their evaluation and their philosophy constructing a roster, when you go into drafts, you're drafting guys hoping that your biggest issue is that they played so well that you have to now negotiate a second contract with them that might be a number that you're a little uncomfortable with. So for me, Samuel exemplifies everything that Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch preach that they want in a player. He's physical, he's tough, he has a high IQ, he plays the game with a level of just electricity that is just, it's not something that is easily replicated. And he does all of these things off the field that the 49ers want to. He works hard, he works to master his craft. We've seen him get better year after year after year. To me, these are guys that you have to keep in the building. And as much as people cite, DeForest Buckner was traded a couple years ago. For every DeForest Buckner getting traded, there's a George Kittle getting drafted and extended. There is a Fred Warner getting drafted and extended. There's Eric Armstead getting his extension. So the 49ers are making it clear that they are going to prioritize keeping their own talent in-house. And I think Samuel is no different. I think right now, Trent Williams, to me, is the best player on the team. Nick Bosa is obviously phenomenal, but Deebo Samuel is in the discussion, and he is such a unique talent. That's the word I'm going to keep falling back on. Finding a guy that's able to do that, the vast array of things that Samuel can do and be very good at it at the same time is extremely hard to find. So I'm at the point now where I think the 49ers will get an extension done. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. It will be a little complicated based on the different things that Samuel is able to do. But to wrap things up here, when you get a blue chip player like Deebo Samuel, you don't dangle them for draft picks. You don't dangle them for hypotheticals. You keep them through their prime. You build your team around them as the foundational piece that he has been mentioned as by the general manager and John Lynch. And you allow this offense that's going to be built around talents like Samuel, Ayuk, Kittle, and the young quarterback you drafted in Trey Lance to truly flourish. So again, it really just comes down to, at the end of the day, the known commodity to me is something that will always be more valuable than giving up assets for a draft pick when a player is still in the heart of their prime. With Samuel, he could just be entering it. So the rumors, again, back to the beginning, the 49ers haven't entertained it. We're not getting reports like we saw in Kansas City. Adam Schefter came out and was pretty much like, hey, like the Chiefs are in talks to trade Tyreek Hill. This is happening. Until that happens with the 49ers, I don't think there's any need to press the panic button. There's nothing to worry about. The reason why I wanted to make this video was just because I've seen a lot of talk about how Samuel might get traded and how he should be traded and how assets are better and cap space. There's a lot of people that think Deebo Samuel should be traded, and I just think it's outrageous after what we saw from him. So I just wanted to come on here, rant for a little bit, share my 2 cents. Appreciate anybody for stopping by. If you've hung around and listened to the whole video here, I'm just getting my channel up and running. So please like the video, subscribe to the channel. I will be doing lives pretty much every day, trying to get videos like this up every day when I have reactions to stuff. I also write for the Niners Nation at SB Nation. So if you are into articles and anything that's a little bit more written work as well, you can find my work there. My @ on Twitter is here as well. So appreciate anybody who stopped by. And again, don't trade Deebo Samuel. It's absolutely foolish. I think the 49ers have the common sense to get a deal done. I think they will. Hope everybody has a great weekend, and I hope the offseason has less of these reports sending people into a frenzy. So thank you to everybody for stopping by, and